motion to enter executive session to discuss the superintendent's, my apologies. A motion to go into executive session to discuss the superintendent's mid-year review, employee grievance report, and pending litigation regarding board member removal. Take a motion. Nikki, any second? Anne Marie, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We are now in executive session. I'd like to recall this meeting to order, and if you're willing and able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll start with some introductions. Good evening, I'm Di McBride, I'm the board president. To my left.
Good evening, Bo Wright, superintendent of schools.
George DeMarteau, attorney for the district.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
Hello, James O'Brien, board member.
Good evening, Pat McHugh, assistant superintendent for human resources.
Dina Wilson, assistant superintendent for instruction.
Hi, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Neilana Selm, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Good evening, Ariana McKnight, Student Council Board Representative.
Hello everybody, Sarah Warren, Student Representative.
Good evening, Jennifer Laird, board member.
Good evening, May Abdullah, board member.
Good evening, Dolores Tellerico, acting district clerk.
Hi, Amaris Straczynski, board vice president.
Thank you. Brings us to agenda review. Anything to add or change on our agenda?
Diane, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I can't get much closer to it.
Okay, I don't know if they can turn your mic up.
Okay. We'll see what happens. Okay. So, agenda review. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none. Any announcements? All right. Seeing none or no announcements, we'll go to our student representatives for their report.
Good evening, everyone. As I mentioned in last meeting, the Student Council was making an effort to establish a mental health awareness project. We are pleased to say that we have officially stated one. We are calling this project the Month of Love. During the month of February, we are composing 20 different challenges for students to participate in. Activities such as drawing, yoga, and breathing exercises will be implied. For each challenge a student completes, they earn a ticket to put towards raffles. We have put together different types of baskets. Our hope is to demonstrate positive strategies to improve the mental health of our peers.
Also, the senior class started a pie fundraiser as of yesterday. Students will be able to purchase tickets in the next few weeks to win a chance to pie a teacher of their choice in the face. This will take place on February 11th and 12th during lunches.
That's all for the student report.
Thank you, ladies. We're always glad that you're here to share what's going on.
Thank you.
This brings us to the public forum. This is where members of the audience may address the board regarding items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak to something that is on the agenda, please wait until that item and we'll have you raise your hand. Usually if it's on the board agenda, we'll have our conversation up here, the board first, and then we'll entertain questions from the audience. We're asking folks to try and keep their comments to about 3 minutes. We do have a full agenda as always. Again, we may not answer your question this evening because we may need to get more additional information regarding the topic. I do have one postcard here, and it is from Kevin Yost. If you would please come up to the microphone. Everybody state your name and your address, please, for the record.
Yes, Kevin Yost, 1474 Middle Road, Rush, New York, although my residence is in the town of Henrietta. I would like to suggest a few things for the district, for the future of the district. First of all, the Good Shepherd campus, when it reaches completion, that perhaps it could be named the J. Kenneth Graham East Henrietta Early Childhood Campus, just as we now have the John R. Jack Gaffney West Henrietta building in the West Hamlet, and this is in the East Hamlet. Dr. Graham, before he retired, sowed the seed and laid the foundation for that campus after the purchase of Good Shepherd by the district. And I'd like to suggest that the old Good Shepherd Church, hopefully will be, if it becomes the Performing Arts Center, like I hope it will as planned, it would be named the Raymond R. Delaney Performing Arts Center, because Dr. Delaney was a superintendent who supported the arts in the district and has the Arts Alive Scholarship named after him. And as for the Carlton O. Webster building, when it's used as a school, oftentimes gets confused with the Webster School District or district competes with. I'd like to suggest that we named after Superintendent McKenna, Dr. Robert A. McKenna's school building at the auditorium at Roth Junior High School be named the Carlton O. Webster Auditorium, because Carlton Webster taught Dr. Max Theror previously at the old Henrietta High School, where the Speedway station Garawash are. I'd like to suggest that this auditorium here at the high school be named Robert J. Sagan, Paul Simakata, who taught Spotlight Theater here for many years, and were my teachers in school. And that the 10 or 12-year-old auditorium at Berger, we named the Michael A. Sturgeon Auditorium. He was the first principal for the first 11 years after the school, Berger Junior High School, was reopened. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Is there anyone else that would like to address the board at this time in public forum for items that are not on the agenda? Please come up to the microphone, state your name and your address. If you can, tip the microphone, just make sure we can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't have time to fill out a card, but I'll fill
That's
one
okay.
out before I leave. My name is Tracy Everett, and my son Peyton is a senior here at Rush-Henrietta. I live at 11 Don Valley Drive, Rochester, New York, 14623. So my concern today is a couple things. I'm curious as to what our plans are for starting sports. I haven't heard anything too much on that. And the other thing is there a plan of opening the schools? I know the governor tomorrow is going to start relaxing some things, and my question is when do we start hearing from you what the plans are for opening? Not 2 days a week, maybe 4, maybe 3. I mean, I'm looking at some of these guidelines that the state has given us, and I don't see where it's 6 feet and masks and everything else. It seems to me it's an either-or proposition, and I'm curious as to why we have to do all of it. Why does there have to be physical barriers and masking and social distancing? I think if we can maybe compartmentalize some of those things, I think we can get more kids in the school. I'm just curious as to why we're not exploring those avenues.
The superintendent was going to, in his oral report, cover some of these items a little bit later on in the meeting,
Okay.
so we would encourage you to hang in to that point of the meeting.
Okay, I will.
We just were just finding out on Friday the sports thing, and this is becoming consistent with the governor where he throws it out. You hear about it before we do, so
Well, I get that.
there is conversation, so he's going to report on that in his part about the sports and the other pieces that you're asking about.
And I understand that. My opinion is this. I think you need to be a little more proactive. I feel like you should already have some ideas in place in the eventuality that some of these things might come up.
And he's going to address that in his report.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to hearing it.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time? All right, seeing that, we'll move on in our agenda. This brings us to item 7, our consent agenda items for routine matters, change orders, tuition rates, biannual academic intervention services, CSE, CPSE recommendations in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting minutes. Item E, the Board of Education meeting minutes from the 12th are not in our packet. They were not completed, so we will not vote on those. So items A, D, and A, F. I'll take a motion. Jennifer, and seconded by Mrs. Brzezinski. Any other conversation on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. This brings us to personnel actions. Item 8, I'll take a motion to approve. Mrs. Lepaka? Mr. O'Brien? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. This brings us to item 9, action pertaining to the approval of the AARH contract agreement. I'll take a motion to approve. Mrs. Laird, a second. Mr. O'Brien. Any other conversation, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Brings us to item 10, memorandum of agreement, action pertaining to the approval of the MOA with the RHEA bus drivers chapter regarding salary changes and elimination of certain language in the Appendix B, Article 6 of Section 3. Mr. O'Brien. Second, Mrs. Laird. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. All right, this brings us to item 11, the remote solar project and proposed pilot agreement. Before we vote on it, is there anything you want to add to this, Andy?
Yeah, just a little bit of background.
Okay.
You're familiar with this, but this is our first solar project since September of 2018, when the board opted out of Section 487 real property tax law, which Section 487 automatically gives a tax exemption for clean energy projects such as solar, wind, etc. The board at the time, it's not that they did not endorse clean energy projects, but they wanted the opportunity to judge each project on its merit. So last January, a year ago, the town passed zoning ordinance and talked to the board where they're encouraging farmland preservation by allowing smaller solar projects up to 25 acres on town farmland, as long as that farm continues to have operational farm acreage as well. The board at the time indicated an interest, so this is the first pilot that falls under that. It's part of the town's agriculture preservation initiative, so the board would still like to support this initiative. The first resolution repeals our opt-out, which would allow the exemption. The second resolution would approve the pilot agreement. And then the third resolution opts us back out again, so the next time a solar or other project comes on board, comes in front of the board, they can determine it on its merits. So, and this pilot agreement gives the school district about $10,000 per year on the 25-acre site as a pilot payment. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Andy?
I have a question on the memo. At the beginning, it says that it's going to be a $10,000 annual payment in lieu of taxes for the 5 megawatt project. But then down towards the bottom, hold on, let me get what page it is. Page 3, it says a $4,000 megawatt payment during the term of the agreement. Can you explain why those are different numbers?
Yeah, the 4,000 is per megawatt, so times 5 megawatts is $20,000. The school district share is half of that,
Okay.
so 10,000.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to be sure. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, so we're going to take those resolutions one at a time. So 11A, the rescinding the opt-out. I'll take a motion for that. Nikki? Second? Jennifer? Any more questions on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Next is the action pertaining to the resolution approving the pilot agreement. I'll take a motion. Mrs. Laird? Nikki? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. 11C, this is the approval of the resolution opting out of the exemption for the real property tax law. I'll take a motion. May, and a second. Mrs. Laird, okay. Any other conversation, discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. This brings us to our workshop, item 12 on the external auditor reports.
All right. What you see tonight in front of you is two more of our audits. Earlier in the year, you saw our main financial audit. This is the single audit and our extra classroom activity audit, both covering the 2019-20 school year. And the single audit is named that because it combines all of the audits of our federal grants. The school district has 10 different federal grants, which are funneled through the New York State Education Department. And the federal government allows us to combine those and the auditors to pick one of the main areas to audit every year. So we have about $4.6 million in total from our various grants, and the biggest ones are school lunch, IDEA for special ed kids, and Title I. And each year the auditors pick one of the major areas to determine whether we are a low risk, and that's all they have to do. And the good news is we did receive a clean audit. We are considered low risk. There were no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no audit findings. So our grant audit was clean. The second one is the extra classroom activity fund, and this one's typically a little bit more challenging because our student funds are overseen by a faculty advisor and a school central treasurer who's typically not a finance person. So usually the people are involved with the club activity because they're interested in what the club does, not as much the financials. So we often have more comments on this one. We have about $340,000 that flowed through the student state accounts. So there is a significant amount of money. The good news is this year we had many fewer audit comments than we normally do. Part of that was due to the shortened year because of the pandemic, and part of it is the ongoing training and experience. People are getting better at what they're doing. So now instead of finding audit findings on major areas, they'll find specific instances within that area. But overall, the auditor did comment that it was a very positive report.
Any questions for Andy? All right. So I would take a motion to accept the auditor's single audit report for the year ending June 30th, 2020. I am Anne Marie. Nikki, second. And any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Next up is the action pertaining to the acceptance of the auditor's extra classroom activity funds report for the year. Slavaka, second. I see May. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Action pertaining to the acceptance of the extra classroom activity funds audit corrective action plan. Jennifer and Mrs. Straczynski. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. That brings us to our workshop on the ICT remote learning. And I'm going to turn it over to Dina Wilson, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction and Curriculum, and Brad Malone, our Director of our... We can't hear you.
Sorry. I'm so used to us being in the boardroom and
I
I
know.
can just stand here and talk. Can you hear me with the mask on okay?
Yep.
Or do you want to put down? Okay. The first thing we want to do is have you log on to the presentation part. In your board packet, you have our written formal report. But for the presentation, we have highlighted the essential areas that we want to speak to you about this evening. So I'm going to have Brad give you directions, Brad Malone, our Director of Information Communication Technology, to have you log on to that. And this is a very similar experience to what our students do as well.
Good evening, all. Thanks for having me. In your email, I just emailed you all a link to the presentation. You should be able to just click right onto it, and it'll bring you up where I'm using Pear Deck. Looks like one of you have already found it very quickly. And what you'll see, this is a tool to keep us all in sync as we go along for the presentation. I realized quickly you'd have to lean really far over to see the screen up here. So we wanted to make it a little easier for you to follow along. There's as people are signing on, it looks like most of you are finding this. This is a tool that can be used both in the classroom, as we're going to use it now, or it can be given asynchronously for students to move through it itself. There's a lot of interactive features. We're not using those this evening, but we could have you draw on these, take surveys, take quizzes, circle different answers. There's a lot of different options this tool could have used. We're going to use it down and dirty, the simplest we can, just to make sure that we're all staying together.
As I said, you have our written formal report in your board packet, and there's several links in there that you can link to. However, what we're doing right now is trying to bring to life with some stories and examples of what we did provide in the written report for our annual report this year. Can I just hit return? The next one. If you remember, just a little over a year ago, the board reviewed our 3-year technology plan, and you approved it, and it was a follow-up to our 5-year technology plan. And then our 5-year technology plan, as you remember, is what brought our one-to-one device initiative, where we identified the ISTE standards as our groundwork around instructional technology, developed our ICT scope and sequence, worked with the teachers quite a bit over those 5 years trying to bring our best practices to light. And then the 3-year plan that we approved last year was really focused on going deeper with instructional technology and making sure that our students are proficient in using technology to curate knowledge, process information, and communicate. And as you all know, last spring, when we had a transition to distance learning, it brought a whole new educational landscape before us. And technology wasn't only nice and innovative, it became a necessity. And as you know, technology is more important than ever as an essential tool, as we had to implement 2 new learning models this year, known as our hybrid model, where the kids are coming every other day, and a remote learning model for the parents that chose their students to learn remotely for the year. What we're going to do tonight is give you some highlights of year 1 of our 3-year plan, and you're going to see how we are staying the course and making some adjustments along the way, as well as giving you an update on how technology is being used in both the hybrid and the remote learning academies.
You may recall this visual that we talked about last December when we brought the 3-year plan in front of you. It has 6 areas of focus. And we knew those were the 6 areas that we needed to keep in mind as we worked with instructional technology, that all 6 of these needed to be in balance and needed to be priorities in order to make sure that we were successful. As Dina mentioned, we had no idea how essential each of these components would be as we moved into our shutdown and then into reopening. Throughout the summer, as information came in from the state, we had to give a lot of thought in how we were going to design and use technology to keep instruction and learning going. We did this in a number of ways. Dina brought together a team of teachers and administrators to do research and article reviews to make sure that we had the best research-based instruction, pedagogy, and learning, and we knew how to implement it. We knew that we needed to get feedback. We learned a lot. Both students, parents, teachers, and administrators learned so much during the shutdown as we tried to implement instruction as best as we could. So we needed to gather that information. We did a number of surveys, both of teachers and of parents, and we used that feedback in preparing to open schools back up. In late July, we sat by our pools and dove into the 142 pages of state guidance. We just learned as much as we could from this and really spent most of the summer with these guidances and trying to figure out how we bring these to life. Sometimes they're incredibly detailed, and other times they were vague enough that we weren't exactly sure what they were suggesting to us. So we spent a lot of time interpreting them. One of the things that was very clear to us, though, is that we needed to offer a remote option to our families. And as we looked around, we noticed a lot of the county schools using a concurrent model, meaning their teachers were going to be teaching students both in front of them and virtually. That's a model that we ultimately rejected for a number of reasons. But I think one of the best metaphors, if you picture this, and somehow whenever I picture this, I picture myself on a corded phone standing in my kitchen. And if you imagine both your spouse in front of you and your best friend on the phone trying to make dinner plans, and you're in the middle trying to navigate that conversation. That's exactly what those teachers in concurrent models are being asked to do all the time, maintaining two different conversations to two different modes. And we knew that was going to be a struggle. And so that was just not the way we wanted to approach this. That's why we created the Remote Learning Academy. And believe me, there's been many times where we've questioned that decision as it led to an incredible amount of work, both by your administrators, your principals, your directors, and by cabinet. But I think at the end, we've seen that it's been successful in allowing our students to be focused and our teachers focused either on virtual learning or hybrid learning. We've had to adjust our online assessments. We knew that we did not want to waste the valuable class time we had with just making sure our students could demonstrate what they know. So we had to move our assessments all online. We had to upgrade our programs, we had to develop professional development to deliver it, and we had to make considerable software and hardware purchases. And this all happened in about 6 weeks. So there was a lot going on this summer. Not all of it by my pool, no. So we're going to walk through all 6 of these areas and talk about how we had to shift and think about these areas as we looked at reopening school and through our first semester. Digital responsibility has been one that we have focused on and talked about, and we needed to continue to do so. We know as educators, whether it is around a campfire or entirely virtually, students, children, and young adults are going to test boundaries. They're going to try to see what they can and can't get away with. And we have seen that within our models as well. We've had a number of students, not a big number, but enough, that have had incidents where we have to keep repeating the importance of being respectful, of being trustworthy. All the models that we have in our PBIS, we have to keep reinforcing those in a virtual model as well. It doesn't go away. Students testing limits and boundaries does not go away just because we move into this boundary, but just because we move into a hybrid model or a virtual model. So we've done a lot of talking about that. We've had to monitor and respond to inappropriate and self-harm incidents using GoGuardian. We saw very, very early on in the shutdown that our students were struggling with a lot of mental health, something we've talked about quite a bit, and our reports about self-harm reported that, showed that. We had an increase in them. We were able to respond to them quickly as administrators. For the second semester, we're going to keep deepening online classroom culture. We're going to continue focusing on our matrix, having these conversations, reminding students what's important, and when it comes to digital responsibility and making sure that we have those open communications and responsiveness to inappropriate or offensive behavior so that we may bring them back in the fold, make them learn from those and move on with our instruction.
The next component of the plan was the upgraded curriculum. And when we talk about an upgraded curriculum, we're talking about how do we elevate our curriculum so that students can master the ISTE standards as well as those essential ICT skills. So we did have curriculum designed over the summer to continue to work on that. That's been work that has been targeted and planned out over the 3-year plan. That curriculum work continued as planned. But we did have to make some adjustments in our curriculum around how to best provide the asynchronous learning opportunities. So a lot of our common learning experiences were adjusted in the curriculum, and we made accommodations around that. We also identified areas that were essential and given our teachers that professional discretion to identify what's most essential and what we need to be covering in the curriculum. We also had to adjust some of our monitoring and adjust some of our curriculum pacing calendars, and we continue to monitor that, as well as purchase additional online resources and upgrade other ones that we did have. We did realize when we started to transition into the need for a hybrid and remote learning program that we needed some additional online resources, and teachers identified some areas that we needed some additional resources in, such as Zern for our math program. We also identified some science resources, and we have a science teacher here this evening, so that we can emulate some of our labs in our online environment and so forth. So those purchases occurred quickly over the summer so that we were ready to go and have that added to our curriculum for our hybrid and remote students. As we move into second semester, we'll continue to implement any of the revised curriculum that occurred over the summer. For the second semester, you will find that teachers will continue to use the technology in a more advanced manner, and we'll continue to monitor and adjust pacing calendars as we go through the school year. We did get off to a little bit of a slow start, so we didn't get through as much the first quarter because we're giving time for students to adjust to the new models and the new technology and so forth. But we are trying to make up time as we go along to ensure that we still get through the essential curriculum in every given course or grade level. We will continue this spring to solicit feedback from our teachers. Our program directors do that through their program meetings, email, and the use of eDoctrina, where teachers can leave comments and make recommendations. And like always, we'll prepare for our curriculum writing for this summer coming up. One of the biggest changes that happened was, again, learning how to use those resources we purchased and put them into instructional practice. But in addition to that, I'm going to show you a graphic here referencing blended learning. Blended learning became the major instructional teaching methodology that we really focused on in August and in September. And when Brad mentioned that, we brought people together to identify what teaching strategies were we going to need the most in order to teach in a hybrid and remote learning plan, and not just for a temporary situation because of the changing landscape of our teaching and learning, but also as we're moving towards more innovative practices and giving our students more authentic experiences. And blended learning methods is where we landed. And the graphic that you're seeing right now on your computers is a graphic that we developed, that we used at Leadership Development this summer, and we're also using through our PD online and in person, and it just helps you understand what blended learning is. And by definition, it really has nothing to do with technology, because remember, technology is always the tool that gets us there. The definition is really about student-centered learning that allows for choice. And when you think about blended learning, it can happen in a classroom, it can happen in another location. Students should be able to have choice in their path and their pacing and even the timing. And you're seeing that occurring a lot this year in both programs, where students are informed of what they need to know, understand, and be able to do. The teachers give the instruction and various methodologies that they use and modalities. Then students are engaged in their work and receive assistance from the teachers as they go along, either when they're in person or in a remote learning academy through their Google Meets and so forth. So that is the area that we really landed on, is how do you use different methodologies when the students are with you in person or when they're working independently. And there has been an increase in independent work, which we refer to as that asynchronous work that the students do. And even in a remote learning academy, the students, do attend the 5 days a week virtually, but there is times that they are still working on asynchronous work when they're not in a Google Meet with the teacher. I gotta go back first, hold on. The other thing we're going to work on as we get into second semester is continuing with the blended learning. We always learn best when we learn from one another. Now that we're up and going, you see a lot of collaboration among the teachers, and the building administrators have been great, giving them time on the Wednesdays to continue to learn from one another and continue to build their repertoire of best practices. The one thing that we did notice a little bit of an uptick on a little bit this past semester was more traditional teaching methods. And I think as we were quickly learning how to use this technology and try to figure out this new, what I call it, new educational landscape, we went back to a lot of taking some of our lectures, our worksheets, and just, putting them in a video or in a PDF. And what we're finding is that can become very cumbersome for students. So they have numerous packets to do, a lot of lectures to watch. So we really want to think about how can we be designing our blended learning lesson activities that make them more interactive for kids. So that'll be some of our work as we move forward and try to think through how to provide more practices that engage our students better, opposed to doing the old-fashioned kind of worksheet activities. There's a time and a point. I see some head shaking. You're going to have your turn to speak in a second. We know that there is times when there is written assignments, but what does that written assignment look like? So we'll be working on that for the second semester. I hit a little nerve there, didn't I, ladies? We talked about the curriculum, we talked about the instruction, and of course our assessments. As we know, assessment is part of teaching and learning. That assessment drives us as educators to know where our kids are and where we need to spend our time teaching and learning. However, this year, we quickly realized that we're going to have to revise some of our assessments. When you're working in the type of environment that we are and learning in this type of environment, we knew that we had to cut back on the assessments. We did remove some that we didn't feel as though it was essential, especially at the elementary level, and we also shortened some of them. And what we really were aiming for is to make sure that any assessment that we were giving was essential, reasonable, manageable, and equitable. In addition to adapting and changing the assessments as we go along, we also realized that we had to make sure all our assessments were available online, not only for the RLA students, but also for the hybrid students. And you heard Brad mention this earlier, is that when our students are here, we don't want them spending an hour taking a test. We know we have the capability and the tools in place that they can take their assessments during their virtual learning days. So all our assessments have been, or in the process and continuing to be, put up in eDoctrina, our learning platform for students to take online. I just want to give a shout out to the teachers who've given a lot of feedback and have helped along the way with the assessments, as well as the clerical staff that has spent hours and hours making sure everything's put into our resources so that they're available for the online administration of tests. The one other thing that we're doing is we're adjusting some of the timelines for our students when we look at some of the windows of opportunity to take assessment, and also making sure that when we give the assessments that we're looking at the time frames around them. As we move into second semester, we know that there are some technical issues. We talked about them a lot at Instructional Council. So we're working with the vendors to make sure that when our teachers are going in to assess and grade using our online resources, that we can do it efficiently and effectively. And there has been some little glitches that sometimes it's taking a little bit longer than it should, working through different tabs and windows. But the good news is that the vendors that we do use, we've had a good working relationship with, and they've been very responsive to creating some new features for us in order for us to be able to operate more smoothly when we're using our technical platforms. The one thing that we've talked about here at the board is making sure the students are completing their assessments online. And to preserve instructional time, they take the assessments virtually. Even in our remote learning academy, that's one of their asynchronous assignments is to complete an assessment. Well, as you know, with adolescents especially, that time management or sometimes avoidance to take a test does occur. And when kids are taking assessments remotely, we don't have the same tools in place as we do when they're here in person to get caught up, do retesting, do makeups, and so forth. So we've been meeting for the last couple weeks. We've identified some things from technical issues to support issues that we are going to be putting into place for second semester with the goal of not having as many incompletes. Now, I do want to note we have incompletes every year, and we're used to handling this. We just need to think of other ways to be able to work with the students since they're not in person all the time. So we'll have that in place for second semester. And I'm happy to report that our capstones will still be administered this year at 3rd grade, 6th grade, and 9th grade. We made some minor adjustments due to timing and making sure that we're not asking too much, and again, in this learning environment that we're providing this year. So, but they will be occurring, and it's very meaningful because this is the world that we're living in, so the capstones are very fluid to be able to give in a remote environment. The good news is that our 12th grade capstone is being piloted this year as planned. We did make some adjustments to it, again, for timing, but we're real excited about our 12th grade capstone. The English department's been wonderful. Where did Brad go? They've been receiving it. Our ACT coaches and Jeanette Hinioto has been working with them, and the 12th grade capstone is going to be a little bit of a passion project for our seniors where they can research a personal interest that they want to talk about and communicate. Have you ever seen a TED Talk? They're going to be doing what we call comment conversation, where they do a little short video or they present in any modality that they choose as their capstone project. So we're very happy to know that even though we've been working on many other items this year that we didn't anticipate, we're still on course to achieve the curriculum changes as well as assessment upgrades that we were on target to do. Okay, I know I got a little long there, I'm sorry. I'm trying to want to go on to PD?
After surveying the parents and the teachers, some of the surveys that we give every year to the teachers and then also hearing from the parents, it became really clear to us that our teachers discovered there's a lot about technology and effectively using technology in a virtual world that they were still feeling a little unsure about. And so we really decided to offer professional development often and deeply, and in as many different ways as we were expecting them to instruct. So here is just a list of some of the titles that we have done in the first semester. For professional development, some of these have been in person, some of them have been synchronous online, some have been asynchronous that we've delivered through the Office of Professional Development. Some of them we have given as choice in faculty meetings and program meetings. And we're always trying to offer our teachers professional development in a multitude of ways. Every week we give, on Wednesdays, we have required professional development for both secondary and elementary. And for our secondaries, we've also been offering some optional professional development in the mornings. Over 300 of our teachers have taken advantage of at least one of those sessions in the mornings. So that has been really successful. We collect feedback, we ask for reflections, and then we try to tailor additional professional development as it is, based on their needs. And finally, the one that people are always the most excited to talk to me about, robust infrastructure. But this has been incredibly essential this year. We've purchased and deployed new hardware, including headsets, monitors, and document cameras. We began with the teachers in the Remote Learning Academy, providing them with a second screen. We realized very quickly it's essential, if you're going to be on a meet, to have another screen so you can see the work, so you can watch your students while simultaneously broadcasting your work. Then as we went along and we had some of the difficulties Dina mentioned with the doctrina and the grading and moving between a grading platform and your grade book, we realized that the dual monitors were really essential, not just for our remote learning academy teachers, but for all teachers. So we've deployed over 300 monitors, teachers that wanted one, in the hybrid program as well. So we have over 400 monitors we've handed out this year, and that teachers have responded incredibly well to. We've purchased more document cameras and headsets. We've upgraded some of our Chromebooks for some of our students. One of the areas that we've been asked about all the time since we started the one-on-one program is how do we know that how many of our students don't have internet at home? It's certainly something that we've studied, we've asked some survey questions, but now we have some pretty solid data. And how do I know that? It's because I've been handing out hotspots as counselors, librarians, technology teaching assistants, and principals have identified families that don't have internet at home. We've handed out 43 devices. We always estimated it to be below 5%, but it's really below 1% of our students have reached out for this. And what we found out of those 43, about a third of them were families that just could not afford internet access, or the internet access was turned off. The rest were from larger families that had a basic level of internet service, maybe a DSL line or a basic level cable, and multiple students in the household, families with 3, 4, 5 students trying to do virtual learning simultaneously. Their Wi-Fi was just not handling that. So we've given those families additional hotspots to spread that load out so they can have the multiple meets on the Wednesday afternoons, Wednesday mornings, or all day if they're remote learning. So again, we've always been right that internet is not the major issue for most of our families. It's always been devices. That's something we've always stood behind, and now we really have the numbers to prove it, with only less than 1% of our families needing this resource. We have additional ones as they're found, and we can provide them. And even some of those that they didn't have internet, they didn't have internet at home. They didn't have it at grandma's house, because that's where they're going throughout the day on Wednesdays. So we've had to help in some different locations. As Dina's mentioned, we've purchased additional software to support online learning, especially at our elementary level, with Science Mystery, with Zern for math, with AimsWeb for English. We've purchased a number of resources. And finally, we've worked really hard to resolve technical issues in network situations. As you know, we had I know that Bo talked to you about, we had a pretty major phishing incident where many of our students gave credentials up. We had already had a retainer in place with a security company, so once we discovered there had been an issue, we weren't sure if it was a breach of that or not, or phishing. So within 3 hours, we had a senior engineer at the company working with us, and we were able to determine within 24 hours that was not a breach of any of our systems. None of our systems or personal PPI, personal identifying information, had been identified, had been breached or stolen. That it had all come through phishing schemes with our students. And so by having those resources in place, we were able to move quickly to determine the problem, and then within 4 days, we changed over 5,000 passwords, communicated them out to all of our students, and instruction moved on with barely a hiccup. So that was a lot of hard work from our technology teaching assistants and our librarians in the schools, and our parents at the Remote Learning Academy helping their youngest ones learn new passwords. So that was incredibly beneficial to us. Next semester, we are conducting a security risk assessment. We're using a company called Core BTS. We'll be using them to analyze our system, to look deeper, to make sure that we don't have any security risks. Not just with technology, but just like with a financial audit, they'll meeting with different departments to find out how are we handling personal identifying information in our systems. How do we give it out? When do we give it out? In terms of our registrar, in terms of our buildings, in terms of our business office, our information services. They'll be interviewing a lot of people throughout the district to find out how do we handle that information safely and make sure that it's being well guarded. We'll continue to investigate new software to align with instructional needs, and we'll continue to sunset software that no longer serves its purpose. Just as important, much harder because, there's always a few teachers that love it. But as we we look very closely at our usage data, and we'll sunset the ones that aren't getting the usage or aren't related to the curriculum the way that it used to be. And finally, we'll continue to review current hardware for optimal performance. As we look towards the future, Google Meets, this much video conferencing is not something we were originally planning on the Chromebooks doing for us. So some of our older Chromebooks are struggling to keep up. And so we'll look to replace those with some higher-end Chromebooks that can handle this need in case we need to go further with video conferencing. So those are our 6 areas of focus. They were an incredible roadmap to us to keep us focused on what was essential and what we needed to expand upon and what we needed to change and pivot in this situation. So by keeping those 6 areas in mind, it allowed us to make sure that all of them were developed and safeguarded and acted upon in order to support our teachers and students. I'm going to talk really briefly about some of our technology we're using in hybrid and remote learning models. We've addressed some of them, but I want to touch upon them now. Andy Whitmore told me years ago when we started using Google that eventually they'd offer a premium product that we'd purchase into, and sure enough we have. But we have bought the Google Enterprise, which allows us a lot more background information. It allows my team to do a lot more investigative work for some of those digital responsibility issues that we've talked about. It also gives a lot more focus and options within our Google Meets, the breakout rooms, the polls, the question and answers. Those all come from this new enterprise that we've purchased into. It allows some originality reports, so we can make sure the students aren't inadvertently or on purpose plagiarizing information. Analyze for offensive or self-harm reports. We have now brought on Go Guardian Teacher, which allows teachers to monitor during class time, see into the screens of what their students are doing. This is incredibly valuable when you're a remote teacher with a kindergartner trying to get them to click where you want them to click on a screen when they're remote and you can't see what they're doing. The fact that the teachers can now see them and they can help the kindergartner or sometimes help the increasingly frustrated parent click on the right buttons, click on the right things by seeing into the screen has been very valuable. It helps us keep our students engaged. It helps us understand exactly when our students are getting lost or when they're getting confused. It gives them a lot of insight into what's going on the other side of the screen, which is invaluable when you can't move around the room as easily as you want as a hybrid, and even more invaluable in a remote setting. As we've talked about, we purchased subscriptions and software. We've added some hardware and some hotspots. And I could go on about the technology usage that we had, but then Dina reminded me that we have 2 experts that live how technology is used in RLA and in a hybrid much more than Dina and I can ever talk about. So I want to thank Ariana and Sarah for agreeing to talk a little about their experiences and how they've been using technology in each of these areas. So I'll turn it over. Ladies, I don't know which one of you would like to go first, but thank you so much in advance for. And I'll let you know that my instructional technology coach met with them. She had come with some questions. She eventually just pushed those aside because these 2 ladies came with a full script that came planned just from a 1-question email I sent to them. So thank you both so much for your preparation and the hard work you've done for this.
Thank you. So the first topic, my name is Ariana McKnight and I'm in the RLA. So the first topic I want to talk about for first semester was Google Meets. And for me, it is a daily struggle for teachers to get student participation. And many teachers don't know whether the students are present because they generally only see their icons. And because most students have their camera off, it's hard to connect with them. So I believe we should make having cameras a part of the participation grade. And then when students can't have it on for some reason, they can email their teacher. And this is important because teachers need to see their students. Yes. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I believe it's important to have students required to put their cameras on because teachers need to see their students and connect with them. and it is required at the elementary and intermediate levels, so high schoolers should also require it. And it helps to create a sense of community. In Google Meets, breakout rooms are sometimes unproductive when the teachers do not check in. However, teachers are trying their best and are very interactive. And also with the Google Meets, students aren't able to create their own Google Meets, so if they want to meet with other students, they cannot use Google Meet in order to do so. Regarding Go Guardian Teacher, I've only used it in my Spanish class periodically, but it's very useful because teachers can see where their students are online. My younger brother is in 6th grade and he uses it often, and is especially useful for elementary and intermediate students to keep them engaged with the teacher. For tests, there's a lot of flexibility with testing, and it's very low stress because we usually have multiple days for testing. And many students have experienced better grades this school year with everything being open notes. And for assignments on Google Classroom, sometimes teachers assign them all at once, so it can be a little overwhelming. And some assignments, such as labs, are easier to do on paper. So getting packets sent home or printed is very useful. And generally, just looking into the next semester, some of the most important things, I believe, are requiring that students have their cameras on and helping teachers find ways to engage students to help them participate more in class discussion. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Sarah and I go to the hybrid version. So for Google Meets, I usually only attend them for Wednesdays. That's mostly just due because I go to school on Tuesday and Friday. Regarding the Google Meets, I will have to say that I really don't utilize them. The reason why is that teachers often will post on Classroom, only come if you have any questions or just if you want to hang out or anything. I have yet to use a Google Meet on Wednesdays to learn anything. And I think the reason why to that is that there's just not enough time for teachers to teach anything during these Google Meets. I do think it's unfortunate that we don't use these times and that I just usually just do my homework. So I would say if there's any way we can expand these times to meet with teachers, that would be very helpful, just to give us another day to learn more stuff. Regarding Go Guardian, I have used it for some of my in-person classes, and I think it's totally a great object that we're using in class. It's very helpful to keep students on task, especially with people who, like me, I have ADD, so it's very hard for me to stay focused sometimes. So that little motivating factor definitely helps kids a lot. For testing online, eDoctrina has been amazing, I have to say. You can close it out and come back later and everything is saved. You have more than enough time to complete tests. Yeah, it's very good. I enjoy eDoctrina. And then for Google Classrooms, I will have to say teachers have definitely improved their organization skills. It's built on each unit, which is really helpful compared to last year, I have to say. So that's really all I have. Yeah, thank you.
And I want to thank you both for sharing. And, when Brad and I did not meet with them because I wanted them to give you an honest perspective. And that's why I asked our ICT coach to meet with them. Because we are surveying students. We just finished up a survey of the RLA students, and they tell us honestly. And, we are fully transparent. There are many things that are going well. You heard us talk about them. You heard the students tell you directly, just as if you were doing a visit in a school, and we can't do that right now, but this is the closest that we can get for you to be able to interact with students. And there are things that we're worried about, we want to get better, and there's things that the students want to see improve too. So I want you to know that we are in conversations as an administrative team, with our teachers, with our students, and we did our family survey in the fall as well as last spring, and we continue to take that information and we continue to try to make improvements as we are living in this environment. The tough thing is change in a system our size is slow. There's some things that we can fix quickly, And then there's other things that take time to work on and change. When we had some issues around some Google Meets and about some inappropriate behavior, we could be right on that, working on that. When you're talking about things like our Wednesday schedules, that is something that we came to an agreement with the teachers on. So to look at that would take a lot of conversations. Depending on what we're going to be allowed to do next year, once we get our guidance for next year, this is information that we'll use to reshape our educational models if we continue to offer some form of remote learning. So the good news is, in a very short amount of time this past summer, we put together 2 models that I am very proud of. They are not perfect, but they are educationally sound under the conditions that we're working and learning in. Our Remote Learning Academy, hands off to our students. Our parents of the RLA have been phenomenal in helping their children and helping us, and hands off to the teachers and the paras that work in the RLA program, because it still amazes me that we're going to be having about 1,700 students, we're about 16 something, 50, okay, that are engaging and learning and are being very successful on their assessments, and they've never stepped foot on this campus. And it just amazes me again on how the teachers and the students and the families are all working and interacting, and we have some great success stories. So thank you, ladies. Thank you to the teachers who are here today and parents that are here, because it truly has been a team effort in the Remote Learning Academy as well as in the hybrid program too. So with that said, just to bring some closing to our presentation tonight, Bo keeps challenging me a little bit and says, you know, where is this going to take us? And where do you really see us being as we go down the pike with using technology in our instructional program? And the one good thing is that we're going through this experience. We have our 3-year plan. We've always been a leader in instructional technology in this district now for the last 7 years. And I do know one thing. We have learned a lot, and the way that we teach and the way we learn has been forever changed. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's inspirational to think what we've overcome. And I know there's some things that we still need to work on to help our students to stay engaged and so forth. But we definitely are living in an era, we're living it as education is being transformed as we teach and learn. So you're part of an important time here in Rush-Henrietta. So as we start thinking about it, how do we want to continue to stay on the forefront? What we have done has served us well when we hit this crisis, but we need to start thinking forward now. And as we're implementing our 3-year plan, we're already starting to think about what comes next after the 3-year plan. So I just want to take a few moments here to close and just share with you some things to start thinking about, if you see articles to start reading about, to know these are the things that we're going to start working on. I'm going to be working with Instructional Council next month to start thinking about different ideas and where do we need to go a little bit deeper. And one area is, I did want you to be aware that New York State in December did finally adopt technology standards, because when we started our technology adventure here, there were no state standards, and that's what led us to the ISTE standards. The state standards were built off of the ISTE standards as a resource, but by the fall of 2024, the technology standards that were adopted back in December, and the link is all in your written report. The official title of the standards are K-12 Computer Science and Digital Learning Standards. And it's not a standalone course that you have to teach. The concept of these standards is just like we've been doing with the ISTE standards. They're built into all courses. So they're giving us time this year and into the summer to unpack these standards. We'll be doing crosswalks between our existing curriculum, the ISTE standards, and starting to learn about the new standards. And we have 3 years to start building the new state standards around technology into our curriculum. So you'll be hearing more about that over the next couple years. The nice thing is that there is a big emphasis in the new standards around global collaboration, and that is something we really have not touched on, and that is coming down the pike. Our kids are not only being connected with their peers when they're working remotely or with people across the country, but now it's being expanded globally, which is very exciting. And we also realize that in our non-regions bearing courses, we have a lot of opportunities to embed these standards. You know, when you're in a Regents course, your hands are tied a little bit around the content and the format of a Regents exam, but we have a lot of courses that are not tied to a Regents exam, so we really want to focus on those courses to think how we can be very innovative and include some new learning and so forth in those courses aligned to the standards. The next area that we really want to start looking at beyond this 3-year plan is developing some additional science, technology, engineering, and mathematical, that old famous word STEM, learning experiences into our curriculum, as well as some STEM courses. As you know, you did approve about 2 years ago the Applied Math and Technology Computer Science course that we were going to start putting into play to do the algebra and the technology together, then the geometry and technology, and it's like the applied sciences with math. And we still believe that we have many students that would benefit from learning their algebra and geometry in that type of setting. The curriculum work came to a little bit of a halt last year when we had to close down on-site learning, and due to our concerns around budget, we did not implement the pilot this year because of the additional staffing that we require. We didn't cancel that. Remember that, Andy, we didn't cancel, we just put it on hold. And our hope is to bring that back to light within another year, and hopefully next year start working on the curriculum and the PD, and then the following year, if the resources are there, we can continue with that plan. We do want to put more coding and design into our, especially our elementary program. We feel so coding is an area we need to really start focusing on. And then investigate STEM programs, especially for our secondary level. We do want to continue with what I like to say, progressive pedagogies that would allow us to expand best practices. I do know that many of our kids have given us very positive feedback to online learning, and especially at the high school level. You know, all our courses now can be offered online virtually. So we want to think about, is there some courses that we can continue when we're beyond the requirement of remote learning to give our high school students choice and flexibility. So we're going to be investigating that a little bit more as we move forward. We want to recognize programs that we can do more collaboration with, and also looking more into networking connections and partnerships with businesses when things start to open up. We feel so there's a lot of opportunity for our students to be learning beyond the 4 walls of our schools. And the last thing is just, you know, exploring some cutting edge and emerging technologies. Technology is the tool that gets us there, but we also know there's a lot of things on the horizon we need to start learning about. Just like we learned about Chromebooks 7 years ago, there are new technologies that I'm not going to spend time talking about this evening, but we do want to start exploring to look at the world around augmented learning and so forth. That's going to be the next iteration. We know college clear exploration is important. And also that would be leading us in doing some curriculum redesign. I know that was a lot of information, and there's even more information in the written packet with a lot of links. You know, I encourage you, if you get a moment, click on some of those live links to see some of the PD and other resources that we provided in there. But we are open for any questions for Brad or I, or even the students.
I have a question. Excuse me. Thank you for the presentation. I liked all the live links. I liked looking at the parent surveys and their inputs. I have a question about curriculum. You said that everything is still online, even though this has been a very different year, being hybrid and remote. From March 13th until they came back in September, everything wasn't up to date as it should be, like the learning and stuff. So there's going to be gaps. You said that curriculum and instruction is still on pace. How are you applying, or how are you making room for students who may have some gaps? Where are they going to fall in this?
So what we're trying to look at, especially at the elementary level, is when we give our NWA MAPS assessments. In the fall, they gave a really hard look at some of the gaps that we noticed in that, as well as our interim assessments that we give in math. So they're using their intervention time and working in their small groups and making it more individualized. We still have our AIS providers available in both programs, and we're looking more not necessarily of assessing them for the curriculum component, but more the skill component to see where the gaps are, and we're doing it through the remediation program. The good news is, when we looked at our fall results at least, and we're doing our MAPS testing this month, the window closes the end of this week, so we'll have some data for the mid-year when I do the mid-year report for you, is that we were surprised. Many kids, held their own through the pandemic. And again, kudos to the families that gave support at home and the teachers that still were working on the reading and the writing, the math, and so forth. We did find that the literacy areas where students seem to hold their own more, and the math is where we did see more of a regression. So we did a lot of those math boot camps in the fall at the elementary level, and both in the hybrid and even in the little RLA, they did a little mini version of it. So we've been trying to work on it through the intervention process. At the secondary level, it's course dependent, so your skills don't always, revolve over into the next grade level. However, in math, I do know that Lisa, our director of math, Mrs. Claire, did work with the math teachers a little bit at the high school, especially around algebra, because if they go on to algebra 2, there is a transfer of skills there. So depending on the course at the secondary level, they looked into what will need to do some minor adjustments. In 2 months, you can't change your curriculum. You can't rewrite curriculum. So what we did was we focused on the assessment adjustments to the most essential, because as we all know, when you're put in a situation like this, you really step back and think, do I really have to teach this? What is most essential for students to know? And when you think about it, I do think on a day-to-day basis we start adding things sometimes. So this gave us a chance to step back and say what is most essential. We felt as though by looking at the assessments and being tight with our assessments, that let the teachers know, here is my target. And then that gave them the information they needed to be able to go through their curriculum and say, if I can get to this, I will, but this is more important. So we really honed in on the assessments, be crystal clear about what was essential to know, understand, and do. Let the teachers then look at their existing curriculum and use their professional adjustment with professional judgment with the kids in front of them to say who needs what in order to get to this assessment. So we spent our time, Jennifer, adjusting assessments because we knew we couldn't ever tackle all the curriculum. And then we're letting the teachers identify how best to get to that assessment. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does. And with assessments, looking at the e-doctrina, how are you helping the students who don't log on, who do not take the exams in a timely manner, or who take the exams and it's done in 20, because I know you can take a look at the times, and it's done in under 3 minutes, and it's a 20-minute test.
Yeah,
I
wish the principals here, because they could speak to it a lot better than I could, because I know they're on the front line working with the teachers and the counselors and with parents. Obviously, it starts with our teachers. They've done a phenomenal job knowing who the kids are, because like you said, they can go in the iTunes and they can see all that information. They do reach outs to the kids first. If kids aren't responding, the teachers first try to work with the families. If teachers find that they're not being successful, we go through what we call our 3 levels of intervention when students have incomplete assignments. It's an administrative guideline we have. Then that's when a teacher will then notify, at the secondary level it's the counselor, at the elementary level it's the principal. We might have to use our team, our pupil assistance teams if it gets really severe, but they have their processes in place at the building level that then utilizes the counselors and the administration team as needed to work with the families. I do know that there's been a lot of home visits this past year. I know even at our alternative program, Mr. Sweeney and his team has made a lot of visits to really work with the kids and families to make sure that they're logging on. I do know at the secondary level we made some opportunities when it was safe for kids to do so, and they had the transportation to come on site to do some of the things on site around the assessment. So we had a meeting just last week talking about how we're going to start thinking outside the box, because we know that for the kids that are struggling to get their assessments done and even their classwork done, we need to think of some other things, because our traditional methods of what we've been doing, it's successful with some, but not with all. So we're going to continue to work on that. But a lot of outreach, communication, and teamwork has been going on with the students. We do find that if a student is struggling in one course, it's usually multiple courses. So what we're finding is we have a pocket of kids that seem to be struggling. So that's where our counselors are really honing into. The ancillary ones where it's just a particular course, they might have missed something. Teachers find that they do a quick reach out, and as you heard our students say, that they have a choice when they take their assessment. It could be just a reminder, they didn't notice it in the Google Classroom. So the little onesie twosies are easy to clean up. It's the students that are having the persistent inabilities to be able to complete assessment is where we get the counseling teams and our assistant principals really involved.
Thank you.
Any other questions, folks? All right. Okay, come to the microphone, please.
So my question is maybe is to glom on the back of Mrs. Laird's question, which I think the second part was, how are you combating the rampant cheating that's happening?
Well, unfortunately, cheating has been part of our school system from the time that I was in school, and I'm sure you were in school. So what we're doing is we use the same practices that we've always done. When it's come to our attention that a student has been identified as cheating on an assessment, the teacher will work with the student. We address it through our code of conduct.
Right. What I'm concerned about in this climate, that we can never really accuse anybody of doing anything right now. So my question is, how are you really holding these kids accountable? Because I'm sorry, but if these kids are all of a sudden getting great grades and everybody's standing here going, oh, the grades are just amazing, there's a reason for that. It's rarely because online learning is the way to go. Personally, my own kid has cheated. I've caught him. I don't know how many other kids are, but I don't know how many parents really care. And I think that's something I'd be worried about as a school administrator.
Well, we always take cheating very seriously, and obviously when we are aware of it, we do address it. We heard our students say that we are going to many of our assessments that are more open book. We realize that many of our assessments and modifications we made, it isn't always about memorizing information, it's about applying knowledge. Many of our assessments now are going more to be authentic-based, project-based, paper-based, so they can use resources. Resources is a little bit different than cheating, but when we do find there's cheating, it is dealt with the students, with our administrative staff. I can also say that with our Go Guardian, we have different opportunities that they can watch what the students are doing. We can close tabs and so forth. So we are trying to put parameters in place to reduce it. We will never be able to totally prevent it, but we are doing the best. In response to the academic grades, not every kid is getting 100. We do have a variation results, and when we've been studying our academic results this year, we're studying the students in the hybrid program and in the remote program. And like every year, we do a 3-year trend analysis, so I never look at achievement just in a 1-year bubble. We look at achievement over a 3-year span, and you notice that when we do our program reviews every year, you'll see the 3 years. We are still finding a variation. And if you look at the kids that are in the failing range, to the passing range, to exceeding standards, 85% above, we are seeing a very similar percentage from first quarter that we've seen in first quarters of other years. So we feel pretty confident that we're still seeing a lot of the same achievement scores parallel to when we had our other in-person learning model going the previous 2 years with some fluctuation.
Hi, Kim Bodden, 6898 East River Road. With regard to the cheating, months ago, my son went to take a test, and I walked by him, he had his phone out. I said, well, you're not cheating. He said, well, the teacher said if we don't do well on these tests, we're not doing it right. Just a comment. I said, you better not be cheating. So just a comment. It's something to be aware of.
You had said something about the assessments being at home. I mean, it's a risk with taking assessments at home, and I do appreciate why, because we want to capitalize on the time that we have with teachers at school. There's risk either way. But you mentioned on the assessments that we want to make assessments that are practical. Okay, so can you give me, what does equitable mean? How do you make sure something's equitable? What's an example?
We can't hear you, Dina. I'm sorry.
Equity can come in many different forms. First of all, you want to make sure it's consistent for all your students, regardless of what teacher they have, what school they're in. If they're taking a Science 7 exam, it doesn't matter if it's in Terry's classroom or another classroom. They're all the same. The teachers work on them under the direction of a program director. So we make sure that they're equitable and consistent just in the format and the type of exam. We also make sure that the kids have the resources they need. Some of our kids take some retesting if need be. If kids need to have modifications or accommodations to even the playing field. That's the lens of being equitable that we think about around our grading practices. We don't use attendance or participation in a punitive way. And we want to make sure that, and most importantly, all the kids have the resources they need to take that exam, to make sure it's an even playing field when we talk about equitability. Okay.
All right, at this time, I think I am going to thank Brad and Dina for this presentation. We do have another
time. I know we went a little long, so I apologize.
No, lots of good information, thought-provoking, and
okay. And thank you,
generous.
girls.
Thank you ladies very much.
All right. We'll let them clear the way, and then our next workshop is on the equity and inclusion. We have our Director of Wellness and Equity.
And while the way is being cleared, I'd like to make some introductions. So yes, you are correct. We have Ms. Diane Wynn, our Director of Equity and Inclusion. But as you know, this is work that is important, work that is dear to this district. And I must say that I'm very proud that we started this work close to 4 years ago. Because I think even if you look at the news nowadays, everywhere that you go, whether it's on the news or at the White House, you see equity being in play. And so we're really excited, and we've been doing a lot of work in Monroe County to really sell the work that we've been doing here, because it is important not only to educate internally, some of the work that we've been doing 4 years ago, but also to allow people to understand how we've implemented it, and how social emotional learning, restorative practices, workforce diversity, it's all part of the equity and inclusion work. So tonight, twofold. At the end of the year, we will have a final report for you, because we are completing our needs assessment that we started 3 years ago with the University of Rochester. But tonight, we wanted to give you a flavor of how our equity and inclusion, even our statements that you know, that you approved, have evolved over the years. And in addition, during the summer, the Diversity Steering Committee really gave us a charge. At the close of the year, they really were they felt very strongly while we were continuing on with the needs assessment, they wanted to see some things in action. So we really went back to the drawing board and developed a 3-year plan while we still concluding the needs assessment. So tonight, not only will our Director of Equity and Wellness share what we're doing this year, and that involves everybody, because when we talk about equity, it's not, when we talk about a district priority, it's not just a district priority for some, it's for all. And you will see how we have evolved to include in other departments, not just focusing on buildings. And at the same time, she's going to share with you some opportunities that you will have to participate, whether in book studies, and you will see a new development coming out next week that we're so excited about. It's called the RH 10-Day Journey, But I won't steal her thunder, but I wanted to introduce her. She has become the facilitator of this equity and inclusivity district priority. You know that Pat and I used to facilitate it. We have taken a more of a participatory role where she is really the one behind the scenes working it. So wanted to introduce her.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for having me tonight. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So as Nurlan shared, I'm really excited to share some updates about our equity and inclusion priority. And I always start any workshops on equity and inclusion with our district priority here. I know you guys know this very well since you approved our district priority, but as our superintendent always says, equity and inclusion is our umbrella priority. I did highlight some words on here to kind of really just key us into some ways that the district is really showing their commitment to equity through standing united, engaging in culturally responsive practices, and safeguarding equity. I want to mention just before I talk a little bit about the different things happening in the district that this is just a snapshot. So there's many, many, many other things that we won't have time to talk about tonight. Pat is doing many things with workforce diversity. Dina is doing many things with instruction and curriculum. So I just want to be clear that this is a snapshot, but this is in no way comprehensive of everything that's happening because there are so many exciting things happening regarding equity and inclusion. But I thought what I would do is organize this tonight with kind of presenting a funnel down approach on how the district is really addressing this. So there's really a systemic approach to this. We have a lot of things happening district-wide with steering committees and manuals and printed materials, professional development, and then there's a lot of work being done with our leadership to empower our leaders to do this work, and then work within the departments and work within the schools as well. So we're going to start with some district-wide action steps. We have extended our collaboration with the University of Rochester, as Nurlan mentioned. You know, due to COVID, we were supposed to finish our needs assessment last year, but that was interrupted a little bit, so we have extended that for an additional year. We are in the final phases of our needs assessment. University of Rochester has conducted 3 focus groups so far with our junior high and senior high school students, and there are plans to conduct more focus groups. They are presenting their initial findings at our steering committee meeting tomorrow, so we will be looking at some of that. Our steering committee has 50 members. I'm going to say that again, 50 members, which I think is pretty amazing because that is administrators, teachers, community members, parents. It is such a wide range of people who are really committed to this work, and it has really enabled a lot of this work to move forward. We have equity and cultural responsiveness online offerings, and we currently have 11 offerings through our online Google professional development platform. And we've also revised our trauma, illness, and grief manual recently. And a big part of that revision was we expanded our section that talks about cultural responses to grief and how we should respond to different cultures representing our district when they experience grief or loss. Because there are some very specific practices in different cultures, and we really wanted to make our trauma, illness, and grief team aware of what those practices are, so we expanded that section in our manual. And as Nurlan mentioned, we have drafted a 3-year equity and inclusion draft plan, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. So the first thing I just wanted to touch on before I introduce part of the draft plan is the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. So this came out in 2019. It's from the New York State Education Department, and it really is a set of guidelines for school districts to use in engaging in culturally responsive practices. These are the 4 main areas of focus of the New York State framework. They focus on a welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, and ongoing professional learning. So the reason I wanted to mention that is because our new draft 3-year plan is completely aligned with the New York State Education Department Culturally Responsive Framework. So our steering committee has been looking at that framework, looking at those 4 areas, dividing up into 4 groups, and looking at what are the successes and challenges of Rush-Henrietta in each of those 4 areas. How are we doing? What are the barriers? What can we do to overcome those barriers? And then we've also been looking at how do we prioritize what we want to do next. So what will we be doing the first year, the second year, and the third year in each of those areas? So this is a snapshot from our framework. And again, I know we don't have time to go through the whole framework, so I pulled a couple pieces out to show you. This is a section of our 3-year draft plan where we talk about what we envision for Rush-Henrietta. And as you'll see, there are a lot of statements in here because these are all of the things that we envision. These align perfectly with our district priority. You know, we're talking about a district where we're really looking at equity of opportunity and access for everyone. We're recognizing our diverse community. We're respecting diverse backgrounds, and that our workforce more closely resembles the diversity of our community. So I wanted to share just one area of the draft plan. I pulled this right out of our 3-year draft plan, and this is Focus 1, which is ensuring a welcoming and affirming environment. So this is an example of one of the specific steps that our steering committee has identified to meet Focus 1. So we talked about what is the step. We're going to have regular review and assessment of school and district climate. Who is the person that's going to be responsible? How are we going to measure it? And what are the strategies? And I wanted to share one of those examples because the amount of work that was put into really aligning what does each of those areas look like in Rush-Henrietta was incredible. And really thinking about who is responsible and how are we going to make sure that we're measuring it. So how will we know? We can't just say, we think we're more welcoming. How are we going to know that we have a welcoming and affirming environment? So each of those focus areas has about 7 to 8 steps in there in our 3-year draft plan. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about the action steps that we've taken to empower district leaders. And really that work started way back, but this school year, it started in the summer, right away. So our summer admin council focused on reopening with equity and mental health in mind. And a lot of the work that we did was focused on how do we really reopen as a district, having equity and inclusion and mental wellness at the forefront of our actions. We also did a book study in the summer on white fragility with many administrators. And I heard through the grapevine that many of you might have recently received that book. So I would love to do another book study, so please let me know if you would like to do that. I co-facilitated that with Dominic Piacentini, who's our Director of Professional Learning and Program Evaluation, I think is his new title. I want to make sure I got that right. But we had a great time co-facilitating that, and it was a really wonderful experience. So we're always excited to do more book studies. And we also had a training over the summer where we trained 13 Rush-Henrietta staff members to be restorative practices trainers. And what's really important about that is for a long time, we have been doing our trainings through PERI, Partners in Restorative Initiatives. And PERI is wonderful. I've worked with them for many years. They're amazing. But what's really wonderful is empowering our own staff to be able to conduct trainings at their buildings, with their staff, with their departments. So now we do have 13 people in the district who are trained to do that work. We've also just recently done some restorative practice community circles training with administrators. So we spent some time over the December break with Dina and her team, which was wonderful. And then over the February break, we're having another training with our superintendent and several other administrators. And by early summer, this summer, we will have every administrator in our school district trained in restorative practices, which is pretty amazing considering how large our district is. And the other book study that we are starting very soon is on culturally responsive teaching in the brain, which is a pretty amazing book. If anyone hasn't read it, I would highly encourage it. But we will be doing that next month, and we are also starting that with administrators. Okay. So I just wanted to share this because this was, as I mentioned, we focused in the summer on mental health and equity. And these were the three big areas of focus, really raising awareness, learning proactive strategies and response strategies, and building capacity in staff. So that's a lot of the work that the administrators have then gone into their buildings and focused on with their staff. We did develop a reopening document for all of our building administrators, and I just wanted to share some of the resources from the summer regarding equity that many of them used during their first week of reopening. And I think I've shown this before. We use this quite a bit, but I always want to kind of ground back to our continuum of cultural competency, because this is really the journey that we're on in Rush-Henrietta. We're always, all of the work that we're doing is really focused on moving us along this continuum, making sure that every decision we make, every conversation we have is really focused on moving us to cultural proficiency. So we use this continuum a lot in professional development. We've used it with staff to give different quotes and say, if someone says this quote, where would they fall in the continuum? What are some conversations we can have to move people along the continuum? It's a really powerful tool. It is something that we've also used at new teacher induction this year that we felt really helped the teachers to understand the focus of Rush-Henrietta. So over the summer at our admin council, I love books, so I'm always bringing up books. As you can see, this is the third book that I brought up tonight. But there's some amazing resources out there. And this was our book that every administrator read, Cultural Competence Now by Vernita Mayfield. And what's really powerful about this book is it really talks a lot about what are some specific activities you can do with your school or your department that will help people to start having these conversations and start looking through the lens of equity with every decision that is made. So we had K to 6 leaders, 7 to 12 leaders, instructional department, operations facility, every leader in the district. And I wanted to share with you a snapshot of a Jamboard that some of our leaders completed, because this is an example of some of the ideas that people had coming out of that training. And when I look at the post-it to the way left, and a Jamboard is just an electronic piece of paper where we would normally put a post-it with our ideas. This is an electronic version of that. But what somebody said, on page 24, time for honest conversations. I'm going to challenge my staff to have honest conversations about equity, which I know is happening at some faculty meetings because I've seen that happening. And then I look, one example over to the way right, create a caring community. Within the context of a caring community, you are relatively unstoppable in meeting any challenge. So there were just some really powerful things that came out of that, and I think it's so important for us to always ground back into, when we talk about these big topics of equity and inclusion, what can we each individually do in our department, in our school, in our conversations, in our meetings, and this is a way to really help our leaders to think about that and how to apply some of these activities. Okay, so equity in action in our departments. As Nurlan mentioned earlier, we have been doing a lot of work throughout various departments in the district. Over the summer and in the early fall, when schools were opening, we did some professional development for the food service department, for MPAC, for DPAC, all on equity and mental wellness. And we also planned a 3-part professional development series for our transportation department. So we looked at their mental health surveys, because we did do mental health surveys over the summer. And some of the things that came out with the people from the transportation department is there was a question that said, how confident do you feel in meeting the social emotional needs of the students that you work with? And many of them responded, I don't feel confident. I could use more assistance in this area. So we collaborated and put together a 3-part series that focused on, here are specific strategies that you can use to support students in your interactions on the bus. Here are some strategies for restorative conversations when things are challenging. And here are some strategies to support students with special education needs. So we did an hour each month for October, November, and December, focusing on those areas. And then, as I mentioned, we have done some professional development at new teacher induction. So I wanted to share this flyer, because this is some work that we're currently doing with the transportation department. We offered community building circles to people in transportation, and I can't take credit for this flyer. Our public relations department worked with someone to make this beautiful flyer, but this was up in the top, and we basically approached them and said, we would really like to give an opportunity, an optional opportunity, for people to come together and participate in community building circles. Talk about some of the frustrations, talk about some things that are happening in the department, and really have an opportunity for us all to get to know each other on a different level and to really work through some difficult, challenging topics that were coming up. And we had 17 bus drivers and bus monitors that participated. And we met every Wednesday. Tomorrow is our last meeting, or was going to be our last meeting, but we were asked to continue. So we are extending for 2 more meetings. But we met every Wednesday for 1.5 hours, and Dominic and I co-facilitated that. And what I will say about that is that has been one of the most powerful experiences I have participated in regarding restorative practices. I don't even think I can put into words what getting 17 people in a room who are all different ages, all different races and ethnicities, all different political views, talking and learning from each other and providing them an opportunity and a format to share their truth. We kept saying, this is about your truth, in a way that was respectful and helped them to get to know each other. And I do want to thank Andy, because he's been very supportive of us doing this work for the transportation department. But it has just been extremely powerful. And Dom and I have walked away from that saying, we just want to do these circles with like everybody. So again, I'm going to offer, if the board wants to do community building circles, that is an option, because it is really powerful, and we would love to, facilitate that if you are interested. But it's really just the power of giving people that chance and that opportunity to be heard. And that really reiterated with us how important the work we're doing really is. Okay, so the last area that I want to talk about is equity in the school. So we talked about, district-wide, and we talked about school leaders in the departments. So now what is happening in the schools? So I could have added 20 slides for this, and I didn't, for time. This is just a very short list of some of the things the principals have shared with me, some of the things I've seen from going into the buildings. There's a lot of trainings happening. There's a lot of community building circles happening. I know right now with second semester, because there has been some changes between hybrid and RLA, our district leaders, our building leaders have shared with me They have circles going on to welcome kids to new classes, to help kids get acquainted, to really work through those changes and those feelings that our students are having. There's been an increase in restorative conversations when kids are having conflicts with each other, and really just doing a lot of work of self-awareness. How are we making sure that we're giving students and staff the opportunity to express how they feel, to understand, that there's a personal privilege profile that was used at one building, but to really understand, what are some of these issues with equity and inclusion, and how do we really make sure that we're hearing each other and we're providing an opportunity to see how we're all alike instead of how we're different. And that's really what's been happening in the building. So I won't read all of those, but there has been a ton of things going on in the buildings. One important thing that happened this year that was new is that our building principals have added a goal into their school improvement plans regarding equity and inclusion. And this is an example from one of our school improvement plans that this principal said, she did a survey of the staff and said, how many times a week, on average, how many circles are you doing? 76% of the teachers were doing 1 time a week. So she said, I want to increase that. I want to get our staff doing circles twice a week. Monday and Friday, Tuesday and Thursday, I want to make sure that they're doing it more often because I'm seeing such an improvement. So this is just an example of one SIP goal that focuses on equity and inclusion. Okay, so next steps. So our next steps in the district are the recommendations from the U of R. So as I said, we are completing our needs assessment. So they will be working with the steering committee to give specific recommendations to all of you. One of those will be our 3-year draft plan. Really looking at the implementation of that plan, and then how are we going to progress monitor to be sure that it's effective. Looking at the progress with those SIP goals, because that is really important that we make sure that we're meeting those goals, hopefully exceeding those goals. We are in the initial stages of developing a district-wide training. Still not sure if that's going to be virtual or not, so for right now, that's what we'll plan for. But really something that everyone can participate in. That's really been our goal for a while, is we know that when you have shared experiences, then you have shared actions, and that we really want to make sure that we have a training that everyone can be a part of. So we're in the initial stages of developing that. We also have a code of conduct committee that was just finalized, hot off the presses a few hours ago today, where we have our final members. But we have people from all over the district, including students and parents, really to look at some sections of our code of conduct and make sure that we have language that is restorative in nature and language that is taking into account all of the backgrounds and diversity of our students. So if there are any practices in there that don't reflect equity and inclusion, that committee will be looking very closely at those. And then we are offering additional book study groups in the coming months. So, and as Nurlan mentioned, this is our RH Equity Journey. Again, I can't take credit for that visual, it's beautiful. But this is hopefully starting next week. We base this on the 21-day United Way Equity Challenge. I don't know if anybody participated in that. That was pretty recent, but it was amazing. So those of us who did participate in it said, we need to do one for Rush-Henrietta. And what it is when you participated in that challenge, you got an email every day that had a topic related to equity and inclusion. And it had videos and articles and different ways to learn more about that topic. So we all got together and said, we want to do that for RH, but we want to make it really specific to us. We want to make sure we include information about our demographics, about our diversity, and we want to make sure that we include what people can do in the district to support this. So there will be a 10-day journey, and that will be coming out soon, so look in your emails for that. But there's a lot of really great information in there, and it really helps to support how this is everyone's part, so we can all do something to support this. Okay, so final thoughts. I just want to go back to Vernita Mayfield for a minute, our Cultural Competence Now book that we all read. And there's a quote that she has in her book that says, "What we have not tried with reasonable effort, intention, and consistency is confronting the values and beliefs that established inequity as a way of life in America." And the reason that that quote sticks out to me is because I really feel like a lot of what we've done in Rush-Henrietta is doing just that. We are confronting those beliefs. We are really looking at what we can do. She talks about the 4 steps are awakening, understanding, analyzing, advocating, and leading. So I really wanted to share with you all of the ways that the district is doing that. And I just want to say thank you so much, not only for having me here tonight, but for trusting me to support this journey in Rush-Henrietta. I'm very passionate about it, and I really believe, I even get a little emotional saying this, I really, really believe Rush-Henrietta is the forefront of this work, and I really believe it's because the board and the leadership believe so much in this. So I just want to say thank you. And I also wanted to say, if Diane or May, I know you guys have been on the steering committee from day one, so you may have some other things to share as well, but I really appreciate collaborating on that work. So thank you, everyone.
Anyone have questions? Or May, do you want to contribute anything?
I just want to thank you.
To the mic, to the mic.
I forget. Thank you so much, Diane. This is not a surprise for me. I've been in workshops and closely working with you, so I'm really glad that you're able to share this with everyone. This is tremendous effort, Nerlan and Pat, from the beginning, but I'm excited to share with everyone, and also excited for the next steps. And you put in a comprehensive, and I like you throw in books and action steps, and that's what I like. So I'm really grateful for that. Being part of that committee is transformational. It's a learning process for me, for everyone, and I think I shared this before. It's every month we meet, everyone shows up, everyone's coming excited, enthusiastic, and committed to work, and this is truly a tremendous effort from everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been an amazing journey, and I'm so glad that we still have 50 people, and I really feel like we're that snowball at the top of the hill, that we're starting to really gain speed, and it's really the fruits of the labor are starting to show. Very, very exciting work that we've been doing. Anybody else questions? Thank you again.
Thank you.
Please participate in the journey. It's going to be fun.
I can't wait.
Students as well.
All right, this brings us to the superintendent's report.
Okay, the first thing that I want to say is thank you to Dina and Brad and Nerlan and Diane, not only for the really well thought out, informative presentations tonight, but for the work that you've done throughout the course of the year to further our priority around instruction and equity and mental wellness. We truly are appreciative. There are no written items for consideration tonight under the superintendent's report, but I do want to give an update around a few items, one of them being testing and vaccines. I want to talk a little bit about some of the information that came out on Friday related to sports, and then I want to talk about how how I see that potentially impacting conversations around school reopening. So we are continuing to do COVID testing in school for those who are willing to have it done. Parents who have said that they feel more comfortable having students tested in school, staff members who have said, I feel more comfortable being here if you're providing testing. And kudos to Nurlan and her team for continuing to make that happen. As we discussed at our last meeting, that's no longer a requirement, but it's recommended by the Department of Health. So we've continued that practice now that we have our systems in place. And we're on track to test about 20% of our on-site population on a monthly basis. So we're continuing that practice. I know that there's been a lot of frustration around the availability of the vaccine. As you know, educators are included in what's called the 1B category, which means that we can be tested, but there simply haven't been the doses, there simply haven't been the sites, and there simply hasn't been the manpower here locally to get the numbers of people vaccinated. And I think it's been a source of frustration. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just the way that it is right now, and I am optimistic that that will get better in the coming weeks. But just to give you an example, we did receive notice from the local Department of Health today that there would be availability for teachers at 4 o'clock today to, a link would be provided. They would provide access to 300 teachers. Now this is throughout the entire county, so this is a drop in the bucket. And so this week there would be 3 consecutive days where people could go online and make appointments. And the link came at 4:03. We had something out, I think, by 4:14 or 4:15, and by the time people clicked on it, the appointments were all dried up. I'm told that happened within 3 minutes. So I think, you know, there's just a real frustration right now on the part of folks who are eager to get the vaccine and just don't have access for all those reasons that I described earlier. We're going to continue to work with the Department of Health, but unfortunately right now, it's kind of been every man for himself in terms of trying to get an appointment. You kind of get in where you fit in, so to speak. And I know that that's been a source of frustration, but like I said, I am optimistic that once we get more doses and we get more pod sites set up, that we're going to be able to get more students and staff who want to be vaccinated access to it. And that also is something that I think as we get more people vaccinated and develop herd immunity, I think that will help as far as the conversation around school reopening. The conversation around sports, I think, at least the way I see it, is somewhat connected to the conversation around reopening. I'll be honest, I was surprised when that guidance came out on Friday out of the governor's office, because the conversations to that point had been different. I was encouraged by those conversations, even though I was surprised. We spent the weekend trying to unpack what we heard on Friday, the superintendents across the county, along with the local Department of Health. You know, at that point that it came out, more questions than answers. Some of us met with Dr. Mendoza via Zoom on Sunday afternoon, right during the Bills game. I want that noted. We made some sacrifices, but only missed about the first quarter. And then we just had a conversation today with all of the superintendents of Monroe County, all of the ADs, and Dr. Mendoza. So the guidance that came out over the weekend is really a reiteration of what came out around athletics in the fall, with some updates. A condensed, more specific version is going to be coming out in the next couple days. What we do know is that even high-risk winter sports such as basketball, wrestling, indoor track, even though that wasn't really considered a high-risk sport, I throw that into the same category because in my estimation, as a former runner, it is high risk if you're doing it indoors. All those sports are approved to move forward, so we're looking at a condensed season starting February 1st and running about 6 weeks, including sectional competition. We are going to be opening Family ID this evening, and a reminder will be going out to families tomorrow morning to let them know that it's open and that they can start going into the system. As I said before, I'm surprised that that information came out on Friday, but I'm encouraged because I view this as sort of a step forward in terms of reopening certain aspects of school life. I think they've chosen to focus on the extracurriculars first. I also am optimistic that the conversation hopefully will next go to what we can be doing to support music and the arts. I will say this about reopening. I'm encouraged. I'm having more conversations at the county level around what that could look like across school districts if we were to look to reopen in the coming weeks and months. But there are a lot of variables there that we have to consider, and I think it's important because I've been getting a lot of emails saying, now that sports are open, why are we not opening schools? And to an extent, they're apples and oranges. They're apples and oranges for a couple different reasons. One is that schools are always going to be held to a higher standard when we're talking about reopening, because extracurriculars, there's an element of choice for families, where if you don't feel comfortable participating, you can say, my kid's not going to play basketball or run track or participate in choir in person right now, whereas school is mandatory. The other reason that we're going to be held to a higher standard is simply because we're talking about a lot more kids and a lot more buildings across a lot more sites. And so I think it's important to note that. However, like I said, I think that there's an opportunity here to begin looking at if these is sort of pilot arrangements and these things are happening in stages. And if they go well, then I think it's going to lead to us being able to have conversations around reopening our schools fully. Those are conversations that we're starting to have internally about what that could look like from an instructional standpoint, from an operational standpoint, what would have to happen. But again, I think it's important to note that there are going to be some decisions that are made at the state level when you're talking about the state education department guidance, which you referenced earlier, someone out in the audience, the Department of Health, and the guidance that's coming out of our local Department of Health. They are going to have to weigh into that, and there will have to be there are decisions that will have to be made at those levels before we can proceed at the district level in terms of readjusting some of those guidelines. So I want to say that, but I will say that I am more hopeful having the conversation tonight around the possibility of looking at reopening, even though, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball and there are a lot of variables. I'm more hopeful tonight than I have been, in the past couple of months. The other thing that is going to help us is if the community infection rate continues to go down. So that concludes my report.
All right. Any questions for the superintendent from the board members? Any questions? Okay.
Hi, Kim again. Just to reiterate what Tracy said, she had brought up a report, and we can send it to you. It literally shows Perry Central School District with 5-person in-day a week, or 5-day-a-week in-person learning, with pictures of the children sitting across from each other with barriers and no masks on, or masks with no barriers right next to each other. And they're open. They're a smaller district, but the way they're interpreting the state guidelines, they're open and they're operating. So in the way the state guidance is, it's one or the other. It's not both. And I know that our county is going above and beyond the state requirements. And we used to say, well, the state. Well, it's not the state anymore. So we can leave this with you. It's evidence that we can do this. Not both. I know we have an issue with transportation. But if you read the guidelines, it's mask or social distancing or barriers. We can do it.
We're willing to take a look. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to new business. And 16A was the claims auditor quarterly report. Everybody had a chance to look at it. Any questions? Okay. The next one would be the board budget quarterly report. And again, there's not much going on there, seeing we've not been able to do any traveling for professional development. That will bring us to item 17, board member reports. First up is the Monroe County School Board Association Information Exchange Committee.
Jamie Scripps presented supporting and monitoring language acquisition for English language learners. Thank you. I'm going to knock my stuff over. And I think I sent you all the PowerPoint and the minutes from that meeting. So I think instead of regurgitating that same thing, I'll just tell you really quickly what our objectives were. It was talking about who the English language learners are, the impact of the pandemic on the English language learners, ways to support them and their families, and the importance of progress monitoring. And it was a fantastic, and I'm not saying it's fantastic because it's someone from RA presenting, it was truly a fantastic presentation. But I think what I find, not that surprises me, and we know how important it is to Nerlon, that we do a great job, but it was really all the comments I heard afterwards, and how many people were contacting her, and how overly impressed they were with the way it's set up here. And I think I found that to be the most impressive thing. The presentation was great, but how much they impressed all of the other leaders was like unbelievable. And Alana didn't do a lot until the end, but then she piped in and she shared some as well. But it was a fantastic presentation. So I hope you take a chance to look at that PowerPoint, but I won't say too much more about it.
It is about time for us to celebrate what we do here. We do a lot of great work, and as I said this year, that was the goal, to make sure that people know what we are doing here in Rush-Henrietta and really model some of their stuff after us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next up is labor relations.
All right, thank you, Diane. So the Labor Relations Committee met virtually at 12 noon on Wednesday the 20th, and that was the same exact time as the inauguration taking place. So I think I and many people on the call kind of had 1 year on the inauguration, 1 year on the presentation. But nevertheless, it was the topic this time was on workforce availability and the obvious pertinence of that in regards to the pandemic time. Kind of the overarching message was just how fluid, staffing needs are. I mean, we have been hearing it here for months, and it is no surprise to anybody on this stage that there are serious challenges present, but also the fluid nature of them, from back in the springtime to the shutdown to the remote, and then the summertime and planning, and here we are now with 1 day left in the second quarter. That we're at the halfway point is really something. They talked about how each district is obviously unique in terms of your format of instruction, in-person versus remote, the size of your district, your collective bargaining units, et cetera. And they talked about how there can be some creative solutions when it comes to dealing with your staffing challenges, such as certification flexibilities, especially with some of your dual cert teachers. Modifying, consolidating bus routes, things of that nature. Again, things that we've talked about and thought about, and then obviously just the nature of the ebb and flow of your day-to-day staffing presence based on exposure and quarantine, et cetera, et cetera. And so, it's again, these sessions are a good chance to kind of take a step back and see the entire landscape across the county of what other districts are dealing with, and that we're not alone. But that we're also, I think, among those that are coming up, frankly, with creative solutions and how to address our staffing challenges and keep our schools open and functional. And that's that.
Thank you. Next up is the MPAC, Multicultural Parent Advisory Council. I was in attendance. We started our meeting with a little bit of a circle, if you will, of talking about we've been in this trying year, but what piece of hope did we all come away with? And it was nice to hear everybody sharing that, and kind of, it's nice to have that building of, especially when you're on Zoom, have that opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better in that community and the things that are important to one another. So talk about a little bit of inclusivity, getting to know people and their backgrounds and their cultures was really important. But the main thrust of the meeting was we had the great presentation from Kristen Mancari-Coppers regarding the ICT, the Google Meets, how, you know, for parents, that instructional piece of how to use all that technology. Parents were really very excited about it, and you could see that they were going to be able to go out and share that information with others. So again, another great presentation for our parents. You know, just even though it's maybe a smaller group, we're still helping our parents, we're still educating them and helping them through this time. Still be partners in this journey. So that was the gist of the meeting. All right. Next up is the Upstate Institute.
We met today virtually. Our big discussion today was about our membership. We're actually only missing about 8 to 10 members that we normally have. We knew it would decrease this year with COVID and people not sending people to trainings this year because of budget constraints. We had 2 conferences in November, the Paraeducator and Safety and Security. They were both virtual. They had okay numbers attending, but again, we had a lot of people come say that we're just not spending money on that type of PD this year. Upcoming training is the pool certification training. It's 2 days virtually. We have 10 people signed up for that so far, and then the office professionals is March 31st. That'll be virtual as well, and 10 people have signed up so far for that as well. That's it.
Great, thank you. Anything else before we go to recap? All right, then I will call for the meeting recap.
Well, this is a nice, short, and sweet one. Thank you to everyone who presented the workshops tonight. They were fantastic. All items passed, and our next meeting is on February 9th.
All right, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting. James, Nikki, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I don't know how much snow is out there, but drive safe, everybody.